Hello, Econ 311 students. This week we're going to look at the K through 12 social science standards for California, specifically the Econ strand. So as you look through the standards, you are provided with two documents. You have the full set of the standards, the K through 12 history social science standards, and then I hope you notice that the second document is in particular the Econ portion of that. So it pulls out the standards that are related directly to economics, the topics that we teach, and talks about what things it is that we're going to impart to our students that help them build their economic knowledge. As you're teaching the standards, hopefully you see that there are 4 disciplines in the social sciences. It's really important to know these 4 disciplines. We're not just talking about social studies, and most of the time when we think about social sciences, we think of history. But as you can see from the standards, that there is so much more to it than just history. So within this discipline of social science, we're going to talk about history, geography, civics, and economics. And what I hope you see is that you really can't talk about one without necessarily involving the other topics. History does not stand alone. If I tell the story of an historical event, in order to fully understand it, I'm going to have to bring in geography, the civics, the idea that people live together in societies, and the economics, because the principles we've been talking about, think about our definition. It's the allocation of scarce resources in order to maximize wealth. Well, that is part of every story ever told. Decision making. How do we make decisions to make ourselves as individuals and societies better off? So all of these are tied together. So as we're looking at the standards, that's a really important understanding. Now in California, within the disciplines of the social sciences, in grades K through 3, we're looking at local environments. So if you look at the standards, you'll notice that for kindergartners, first grade, second grade, third grade, all of the lessons, all of the social science standards are geared towards an understanding of their local environment. So we start with their environment of the classroom and their family. And then as the grades progress, they expand. So by third grade, and you look in the standards, you'll see this, in the third grade, they're looking at their community, and they're starting to get ready to expand even greater into their look at the state of California, which happens in the fourth grade. But in grades K through 3, they're really laying the foundation for understanding. So this is going to be primarily civics-based and economics. The concepts that we're going to want to share with them are about how do you live in a group of people? That's civics. And the economics is how do we use resources? And when you're looking at the standards, notice in the Econ strand, in grades K, 1, 2, and 3, the economics relates to work and the jobs that people do and the work in the community. And so our students are going to start to become more and more aware of how decisions are made, and those decisions are often made related to work and jobs. And so in the classroom, we give them classroom responsibilities and we teach them about work. Well, this is part of the economics and the civics that they're really getting a strong look at in these grades. When our students get to fourth grade in California, the focus becomes on California history. And that again is still civics and economics, because even though it's history, still we're really looking at the community and the experience of individuals in California. And lots of great local resources are available depending on where you live. You might see different opportunities to engage your students in a look at the California experience from the perspective of your area. They get into fifth grade and the focus is, notice it expands. Now we're going to bring them a little bit more. We're going to incorporate history and geography, and they start to relate to the world a little more deeply, right? Before K through 3, it's all the local area, and they don't really go beyond that. Now they're going to start to see themselves in relationship to other times and other places. And so this focus on history is pre-Columbus to 1860, so the Civil War. And this is going to expand into history and geography in addition to the civics and the econ. Going on to sixth grade, we look at world history. This is the prescribed curriculum for California, prehistoric times to Rome. So again, expanding their look at the world and connecting them more deeply. So history, geography, civics, economics. In seventh grade, we move forward in world history from Rome to the collapse of empire. Again, getting all of those things, expanding even more their connection with the world, bigger area, bigger time frame, and our students experience that a little more deeply. And then grade 8, they focus on U.S. history. So in grade 5, there's a little bit of a kind of a beginning look at U.S. history, and you'll see that in the standards. But in grade 8, we have a very clear curriculum for California students that says we're going to focus our social sciences on the U.S. history and experience from 1860 to whatever modern time. The question mark there is because we just don't know how far we're going to get. Usually it does not get as far as current history, probably to the late 20th century would be as late as they would probably go. Grade 9 is pretty open-ended in California. There are some geography. There are some schools that still require geography for ninth graders. There is a new AP human geography that's available. It's a new course. And so that's kind of what we have. We don't have a clear path for ninth graders. However, when you get to 10th grade in California, we're very clear that the curriculum is in social sciences is world history, the modern era. So this follows up from their 6th and 7th grade years and picks up world history in a more modern context. 11th grade is U.S. history, the modern era. Has a brief recap of the founding and then moves into the history of the United States post Civil Wars, where they focus most of their attention. And finally, in 12th grade, we have 2 semester-long courses, each dedicated to the specific topic, one in economics and one in civics, which is really U.S. government. But you'll notice that these teaching standards are connected to all 4 of these topics throughout. So one of the things that you're encouraged to do with the standards is to go through them, read them, know them, and identify these different areas where we're focusing. So see if you can't find the history. See if you can't see the government. See if you can't see the civics. And of course, we're going to be focusing on the economics because that's our focus here. But notice that they are all intertwined and you cannot have one without the others. The other document we're going to be looking at is this, what we call familiarly, the C3 document, the College Career and Civic Life Framework for the Social Sciences. And this is a pretty exciting thing. And you will be completing a paper that utilizes the concepts found in the C3 document and asks you to create an arc of learning like you're going to see demonstrated here. So I would strongly encourage you to be thinking about this. I'll follow up with everybody about deadlines for the project itself, but this is where you can get some understanding of what it is we're talking about. Why do we refer to this document? So this is the College Career and Civic Life Framework. We call it C3. And there's a link here to access it if you want to download your own copy. There are PDF links in Blackboard for you. And what's exciting about this C3 document is that it really changes the way we approach social sciences education. So it used to be that we kind of taught history and then we taught civics and we had all of these different topics. But what we've come to understand recently is that they're all integrated. They're fully integrated with one another. So the standards have been rewritten, and you'll see this as you look at the standards, you're going to see there is all kinds of connection there, that we don't isolate just history, just civics. It doesn't happen that way. And because we understand that, the C3 document allows us to see a revolutionary way of learning social sciences. So we refer to this as an educational revolution. The guiding principles of the C3 approach are that social studies is an important subject. It just is. It prepares students for their college experience. It prepares them for whatever career they enter. And of course, it prepares them to be good participants in civic life. And another thing we know is that inquiry is at the heart of social studies. There's no true understanding without asking some questions. So this is an inquiry-based approach. And part of what makes it revolutionary is because we do this inquiry in a way that is clear and makes sense and really helps students to ask questions in a way that gets them meaningful answers and that they can analyze. Social studies emphasizes skills and practices as preparation for democratic decision making. We want our students to be excellent participants in civic life. So decision making is important, and decision making as part of a society is very, very important. And then finally, social studies education should have direct and explicit connections to the state standards for English language and literacy in the social studies. So we're putting these things together and we're saying, look, we want to value all of the aspects of the social studies, but we also want our students to be able to express themselves well. So the English language arts part of it is integrated here as well. There's a little bit of background here on how this document came to be. And this had to do with the Council of Chief State School Officers, and all kinds of experts were consulted to ask or to provide their expertise, and some really great people got together, and it began as a Common Core state standards for social studies, but it morphed into something very different and very, very valuable, and that is the C3 framework. So why is it revolutionary then? Why is this such an interesting and new approach? And part of it has to do with the equality of economics in this. Again, in the past, the standards and the framework really didn't have a role for economics specifically. And if you look through the standards, you're going to see, especially in the early grades K through 3, or 1, 2, and 3, there are specific standards that lay out the economics of it. And this is exciting because economics always hasn't had equal billing in the social sciences. And so there's an equal role for economics in this. What's also revolutionary is this inquiry arc. So we're going to talk about how we inquire, how our students inquire, but we're going to do it in an arc that helps us really put it together nicely. And this is your project. Your C3 project is completing an inquiry arc. So you're going to see how your students will utilize this to really improve their understanding. It talks about the role for the teachers and students. So the document itself really clearly lays out what the responsibilities of each party will be, what the teachers do and what the students do as response. And of course, the economics themselves found in this document are exciting and really well stated and clearly stated, I should say. So ask yourself this: is this revolutionary? Developing questions and planning inquiries. Is this how you've ever written a paper before? Because we write papers all the time, research papers, and we get a lot of facts out, and they're interesting and they're worthwhile. And we ask our students to do this. Write a paper on this, or come up with a topic here. And that is all very well and good, but I hope you can see that this is a different approach. This is saying we're going to not just write a topic or write a paper on a topic. We're going to develop questions and we're going to plan our inquiry. We're going to ask the questions in a way that organizes them and leads us to a meaningful answer. So we're going to be creating, and you'll see this in our C3 project that you're going to be completing in class, the compelling questions and the supporting questions. You create this arc, this inquiry arc that starts with the big question, narrows it down a little bit as you ask some supporting questions, and then proceeds to gather information and respond to those. Another thing we do in our process is we apply disciplinary concepts and tools. What that means is if we come to understand the concept of the principle of exchange, for example, we apply our understanding of that to what we're talking about. Disciplinary tools, cost-benefit analysis. That would be something that it can be applied. So as we're asking the question, perhaps we're saying, why did this happen as an historical event? We can then say, well, the cost-benefit analysis looks like this. That would be a disciplinary tool being applied. We could say, well, because the cost of, let's say it's the Dust Bowl, and we say, why did people flee Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl, and why would they take the risk and come to California? And there could be a really wonderful discussion of the costs and benefits of that decision and who might have made that decision and what might have faced them. And that is applying disciplinary tools, economics as a discipline. The next part of this is evaluating sources and using evidence. That's also part of our process in our C3 document, is we don't just cite sources, we evaluate them. We look at them and we say, are they reasonable? Are they meaningful? Are they biased? And if they are biased, that's not the end of the world, but we want to acknowledge the bias and understand how it might have shaped the information. So that's another thing that is different about how we're going to do this. And then finally, the end result, communicating conclusions and taking informed action. So this is an inquiry arc. So if you think of it as an arc, quite literally, the inquiry is going to start with a compelling question. We're going to add supporting questions to get information to gather it. We're going to apply our disciplinary knowledge and our tools to discuss it, to describe it, to evaluate. We're going to put it all together. Along the way, as part of our arc, we're going to make sure that we take a good look at our sources and the evidence that we provide for this. We don't, want to just use flimsy evidence, and we don't want to use all biased sources. So we want to make sure that our sources are good quality and that we're getting our answers from a variety of places. And then finally, at the end of our arc, because our inquiry starts here and grows and grows and grows, then as we're expressing our results, we finish the arc by communicating our conclusions, whatever they might be, and taking informed action if that's appropriate. So this is, I'm going to answer the question for you. This is revolutionary because this is not how we've written papers in the past. In the past, you're given a topic or you're told to choose a topic. You really ask the questions yourself, but that's not part of the process. So we're going to add the questioning to the process. Applying the disciplinary concepts and tools isn't always encouraged or used. And then the evaluating resources. So what I'm hoping that you see is this is going to be the process we use. You're going to get a chance to practice this. And ultimately, the goal is to bring it to your students as a way of learning, that they use this inquiry arc in big ways and small ways. We're going to write a paper. You might do it differently in your classroom. You might say, hey, we're going to explore this topic today. Let's start by asking some questions. Let's develop some questions, and then let's explore based on what we have available to us. So this is exciting stuff, and we'll talk about the different parts of how you're going to do your project, which is the C3 paper. So let's start with that understanding of a compelling question. A compelling question is one that is really opens up a line of discussion. A compelling question is one that is compelling, of course, and it compels you to explore fuller. So by definition, it wouldn't have a yes or no answer because that doesn't invite exploration. So a compelling question is one that is open-ended and asks you to answer more than just that question. So here's an example. Was the Obama administration successful in bringing the U.S. out of the recession? And there is no yes or no answer that's going to be satisfactory. This sort of question begets other questions. Well, and we can see some supporting questions immediately arise when you're looking at this. You could say, well, that's a big open-ended question. So what do we want to know? Maybe how many jobs were lost during the recession? What is a recession? How many jobs were created? So if we're asking the question, did he bring us out of the recession, and the administration, by the way, then we would say, well, that depends on what was lost and what was gained. What has been the record of economic growth? Notice we're bringing in history, we're bringing in economics, all kinds of topics here. This I show you not because you have to explore something like this in your paper, but because it is a good example of a question that is open-ended, that asks other questions. And there's no perfect set of supporting questions here. There can be lots of different supporting questions that you might be thinking of right now that aren't listed here. Never worry about that. Supporting questions are always going to be okay. For your paper, I'm going to ask you to have 3 or 4 at minimum, but there's no perfect set of supporting questions. So do not be concerned about that. I just wanted you to see an example here. Some other supporting questions that might be related to the previous compelling question are here. What was the average duration of unemployment? Notice that these are just kind of in different areas, and you may not have thought of these. That doesn't mean that yours are bad. They're just different. So let's take this opportunity to make sure you recognize compelling questions when you see them. So take a second here, and which ones do you think are compelling? Well, let's go through them, and we can kind of tell easily, depending on how easy it is to answer. So here's one. Was the American Revolution really a civil war? And you might say to yourself, what an interesting question, because it opens up all kinds of other possibilities and other questions. What is a civil war? American Revolution, who was fighting in it? Who was the enemy? And was this particular incident reminiscent of a civil war? It was fought on American soil between people that were all residents of the country. And so this is, I think, a perfect example of an open-ended, compelling question. Because instantly, I hope your mind goes to, gosh, that's interesting. Let's ask a ton of other questions to find out. Which nation is the largest source of oil for the U.S.? Clearly, this is not going to be compelling because there is simply an answer, right? It's a yes or no, straight up, one answer question. Why would European maritime explorers risk their lives to find a water route to the east? This would be compelling, as would this one be, because this opens up a bunch of other possible questions. So, different maritime explorers, you could look at the different experience that different explorers had. You could look at Da Gama, you could look at Christopher Columbus, and ask yourself, what were the decision-making processes used? What cost benefits were weighed for each of these? So this could be a really interesting, compelling question. And obviously, this last one, what is the current rate of inflation? Not compelling, right? Because it doesn't open up other discussions. So hopefully you recognize compelling questions pretty easily, and hopefully you're starting to think about, for your paper, what you might want to use. What open-ended topic do you want to explore? So the C3 project is asking you this specifically. It asks you to evaluate an historical decision that would be taught in grades 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. So watch out for that. And the assignment itself mentions this again. I just want you to be really clear on this. And so, okay. Grades 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. And my advice would be go to the standards. I would go to your history, social science standards for those grades and start looking through some of the specific things mentioned in there. I guarantee you will find something that catches your eye, that interests you, that you say, ooh, let's explore that. So, an historical decision. The reason I call it a decision is because, remember, economics is about decision making. So, we want to focus this as an economics paper on a decision that was made, and you're going to find tons of them. Anytime we're talking about the actions taken by an individual, a group, a society, it's going to have a decision component. So, for example, in the sample project that I provide for you, you'll notice it has to do with Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase. Well, that was an historical event, but it was also a decision. And a decision had to be made. So you can remember to consider each one of these as a decision that was made. You're going to be evaluating the decision. And you'll be using some of the disciplinary tools that we'll provide later in the course. That's why we start this now, and we'll talk about this throughout the course. But you'll want to make sure it's framed as a decision so that when we're using our decision-making apron, for example, that we can apply that to this. And you'll see what all that looks like as we go through the course. Next, once you've identified the historical decision, you're going to find that in the standards, by the way. You're going to develop a compelling question. So we're going to start that inquiry arc. We're going to pick something that interests you, and our inquiry arc is going to start with a compelling question. And the compelling question is going to come from the standards. So you're going to find your topic. Let's say you look in the standards and you say, oh, hey, there's something here about people traveling the Oregon Trail. Then you can develop your compelling question related to that particular standard. Again, in grades 4 through 8. From there, you're going to develop at least 4 supporting questions that answer the compelling question. I mentioned this before, but I'll remind you, there's no wrong supporting question. So don't worry about that. But make sure you branch out a little bit and explore this in ways that interest you. Because really that's the great part about this inquiry arc is even though you're working in a group, it's all about the interest you have in the subject. And it lets you explore it in a way that isn't so freewheeling that it gets crazy, but it offers you a lot of freedom to look at different aspects of it. And then you'll follow the guidelines provided to conduct the inquiry arc with a focus on all 4 content areas of the social sciences. And by that I mean the history, the civics, the economics, the geography. And as we do this, we'll talk about this more, and you'll have more opportunities to see examples. Moving on, here is the compelling question that we use in the example of the sample version of the C3 paper that's provided for you. And here it is. Why did James Monroe, Thomas Jefferson, and Napoleon agree to the Louisiana Purchase for $15 million? So there's my big question. Why would they do that? It's open-ended. And it's an historical decision that was made. And here's some possible supporting questions. What was advantageous about the purchase? What was good about it? Why did Napoleon want to sell the land? What was going on in his world? Did Napoleon even own the land? Was it his to sell? And why would this deal be politically dangerous for Monroe and Jefferson? So these are 4. And like I said before, there's no incorrect version. As you read that, you might have thought, hey, I can think of a lot of others. But notice that limiting it to 4 keeps you pretty focused and keeps you from getting so scattered that your paper loses all focus and meaning. Here's another compelling question. These are just examples, and I just want you to get comfortable with the process of identifying a compelling question. Why did King George III decide to declare the American colonies in rebellion, thus initiating the Revolutionary War? That's a big open-ended question. And as we're looking at, we'll do a lesson in here on the American Revolution, what were the economic causes that led to it. And what you'll see is that this indeed has many, many facets to it. and you could come up with some great supporting questions. So hopefully you see that it's all about the history, the historical decision, I should say, covered in grades 4 through 8, and you're going to form that open-ended question that brings about the supporting questions that let you explore the topic. The economics of that we're going to use in this paper are the disciplinary tools and the concepts. So if we're talking about King George, for example, if we go back here and we say, okay, well, let's talk about some of the supporting questions. What were some of the things that happened in the Stamp Act, for example, and some of the events that took place, and how did the colonists respond to them, and what was the genesis of the Boston Tea Party, for example? Well, we can talk about that in terms of the economic decision making. We can say, well, King George probably weighed the costs and benefits of certain actions. And when the colonists responded with a boycott, that's certainly an economic action. And, definitely costs and benefits were considered at every step. So markets, what role did markets play in the decision making? How did this affect the national economy and the global economy? All of those are part of the story with King George. Had to do with trade and the principle of exchange. He probably, made some decisions that he came to regret. One thing they did was they upset the tea merchants in the colonies, I should say, by telling them that they had to register with British tea merchants. And the response of the colonists was the Boston Tea Party. So that has a lot to do with the national economy. And how did that affect the global economy? Well, when the response was a boycott, that shuts down trade between two nations. So all of this is explored in your paper. So you'll find your compelling question, and it doesn't have to be on its surface what looks like an economics issue. It doesn't have to be about the economy specifically. Notice that all historical events have economic concepts built into them. So what you're going to do in your paper is explore the economics of it. It's going to be fun. Some emphases. As we're looking through the C3 document, and I'm going to do a brief look at that right now, I want you to notice a few things. As they're guiding us in this inquiry arc, the C3 document encourages us to pay attention to the Econ concepts contained within it. So we're going to look for the term human capital and benefits and costs. And you'll notice as you're going through these pages, you'll see it. And you'll also see some themes related to economics. You're going to see economic reasoning, which is weighing costs and benefits. They're going to talk about human capital. We've already talked about that. Incentives, distributive effects, general principles, and applications of those principles. And some of these might sound unfamiliar to you right now. I promise we will be talking about all of these things, and you will have tools to bring them to your students. So in this C3 document and this inquiry arc, we have an opportunity to make sure that we see all of these things available to us. It's a wonderful document. So I'm going to let you explore it on your own for the most part. I'm just going to show you a few things where as you're going through the C3 document itself, remember it's focusing our attention on these three areas that prepare our students in the social sciences for life. So there is equality for the economics portion of this. So here's benefits and costs, and you can see these things already provided for you here, but you'll notice terms that they're going to understand. And it starts by the end of grade 2, benefits and costs. By the end of grade 5, there it is, benefits and costs again, incentives. By the end of grade 8, look at this, economic decisions. It's getting injected into their social science education at every level. Benefits and costs again. Notice that is a consistent theme. So as you're exploring your economic decision in your paper, you're obviously going to be able to focus on some of the cost benefits of these decisions that are made. Going here, we look at some other things, and this is just drawn from different areas within the document. I certainly don't expect you to memorize the document. I just want you to see the value of it in shaping how we're going to teach our students to use this inquiry arc. Human capital, here it is, and incentives, human capital. So they integrate the concepts that we're teaching our students. And this is exciting because now our students are going to feel at ease. They're going to see this and say, oh yeah, human capital, we talk about that all the time. I get it. Mine is powerful. My job in school is to grow it. Got it. Benefits and costs. There it is again. Benefits and costs. Benefits and costs. Constant refrain. And data, appropriate data to evaluate. And this is very specific to economics. They're going to look at unemployment, inflation, production, income. These are pretty sophisticated concepts. And how those affect different groups. This is about data and economic indicators again. But we also don't forget that we're always talking about human capital. So at every grade level, human capital is a constant refrain. Benefits and costs, labor markets, and we'll be talking about markets. So let's go back to the inquiry arc. The 4 dimensions, we already looked at those. And let's understand why the inquiry arc matters. And I love this expression, this quote, I should say. And it says, while each of the social sciences has a unique perspective and unique analytical skills, it is impossible to explain the human experience without applying all of these perspectives and skills. If history is a story well told, that story is enriched, deepened, and enlightened with the application of all of the social studies disciplines. Migrations, rise and fall of empires, explorations, international conflicts, hunger, famine, disease, medicine, technological advances, religion, the rise and fall of despots, wars and treaties to end wars, peace, and all other major human experiences are investigated thoroughly only with the complementary application of all the disciplines. To do less, is to tell an incomplete story. Here's a story that lets us see how integrated civics, economics, geography, and history are. If you look at this picture, it's telling a story, and I don't know if you recognize it or not, but this is the story of Hannibal. Hannibal was a Carthaginian general who was avenging the death of his father at the hands of Rome. So the history part of this can't be told isolated from the other 3 parts. Let's talk about Hannibal, just the man himself, the son of the ruler of Carthage. Hannibal is a Carthaginian general. So he is here in Carthage. So you can see on this map that this is where he is. And he is super unhappy because there's been a political action and his father, who was previously the leader, the general of Carthage, has been killed by the Romans. So what Hannibal wants to do at this point is revenge. He wants to attack the Romans, and the economics behind this, of course, is to gain resources. Every war in history has been fought over resources, so you can't take the economics out of it either. So the civics, the politics, has to do with the history with his father. The economics is about getting retribution and acquiring some resources. And here comes the geography. So here's Carthage, and here's Rome. And what Hannibal wants to do is go to Rome to avenge his father's death and to extract some resources. But notice he has a problem. He can't just go directly to Rome without being in the open. And he can't have a sneak attack or the advantage of surprise if he does that. So he takes a different path. He comes over here, and this is the path he follows. This green line shows you this. And he travels along the coast. At one point, he crosses the Alps, and he finds himself crossing the Italian Alps using the elephants. So if you wondered what the elephants were all about, they were the only animal that could make the trip. And you'll notice this picture is kind of interesting because it tells a lot of the story. And this, again, is the geography of the area. The only animals that were native to that area that could get him up and over the Alps in this time were elephants. And yet, notice that it wasn't an easy thing. So he had to use the animal that was available. And as he was traveling, he gathered these resources. So economics again. He uses the elephants to cross the Italian Alps. He lands in enemy territory. So he comes down in about this area. I'm probably getting this a little bit off, but he finds himself in Gaul. And he, as the leader of the Carthaginians, they are in a conflict with Gaul. However, Gaul, the people of Gaul, or the government of Gaul, is an enemy of Rome. And so the old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the people in Gaul said, hey, we're going to outfit you with the things you need. We're going to help you out. We're going to get you up and over in the mountains, and we're going to help you with this attack on Rome. So they were outfitted here with the elephants and the things they needed to cross the Alps. And so here they get over the Alps, and they come down and they travel all the way through. And so they get to the point where they can make this sneak attack. And so they do a roundabout thing, and they make the sneak attack, and then they return back by, through the sea here, the Mediterranean. So it's an interesting story, and but it's a story that cannot be told independent of the 4 different social sciences. It's clear that there's civics, right? There's a war, there's conflict, there's political conflict. There's economics, the resources. Every part of this is connected to decision making and allocation of resources. How do we do this? And every step of the way, economics was involved. The geography was clearly a huge part of this story because it informed all of their decisions. And of course, the history. So this is not just a sterile story that is just history. It's not something that we talk to our students and say, well, here is the story of. What we want to do is make sure our students see this integration. It's a rich story. The social sciences are so essential to understanding the world, and you have to be able to see all parts of the social sciences. And really that's the beauty of the C3 process, is that we can make sure that all the areas of the social sciences are fully explored. And so we come back to this. It is an educational revolution. It is not just another paper. We're doing things differently. We're going to approach the teaching of the social sciences differently. And so what I hope you get from this is that your C3 paper is your first experience with this. And I hope you'll embrace this process and find ways to bring it to your students too, because it is really, really exciting. It takes our students from this, right? The reading of dry, boring history. And through the process of inquiry and an organized way to approach asking questions and exploring, it creates a revolution where they're the ones. And of course, the role of the teacher through all this is to guide, to provide an outer barrier so that it doesn't get out of control, the process itself, so that it stays focused. But we want to guide, support, encourage, and provide them with this framework to work within. It will really benefit our students.